The false memory paradox. How can you vividly remember something that never happened? You are absolutely certain of it. A childhood memory, sharp as glass, plays in your mind. The warmth of your grandmother's kitchen, the exact floral pattern of the tablecloth, the way she handed you a steaming cup of cocoa and told you a story about a boy who could talk to the wind. You can feel the cup in your hands. You can hear the words in her voice. It's real. It has to be. Except it isn't. One day, in an offhand conversation, your mother tells you that your grandmother never made cocoa. In fact, she was allergic to chocolate. And that story? She never told it. It never happened. But the memory is there, vivid, unshakable, as if etched into the core of your past. This is the false memory paradox, the unsettling reality that your mind, the one thing you rely on to define your experiences, your history, your very sense of self, can fabricate entire memories from scratch. It's not just a quirk of your imagination, it's a psychological phenomenon, deeply studied, often exploited, and more common than you'd ever suspect. How does this happen? How can your brain deceive you so convincingly that you would stake your life on a memory that never existed? Let's untangle the paradox. Your mind does not record life like a camera. It reconstructs. When you recall something, you're not pulling up a perfect playback file. You're rebuilding the scene from fragments, filling in the gaps with assumptions, associations, and even suggestions from others. The memory feels real because the process of recollection is real. But accuracy? That's another question entirely. Now consider what happens when an external influence, an offhand comment, a leading question, a subtle suggestion enters this fragile process. Suppose someone tells you, "Do you remember when you got lost at the mall as a child?" You don't at first, but the question plants a seed. Maybe you start picturing a crowded mall. Maybe you hear your own childhood voice calling for your parents. Over time, the scene develops details, colors, textures, and then, in a moment of clarity, you remember it as if it had always been there. Except it never was. Psychologists have demonstrated how disturbingly easy it is to implant false memories. In one study, researchers showed participants doctored photos of themselves as children, digitally placed into hot air balloons, events that never occurred. The result? A significant number of participants not only remembered the non-existent balloon ride, but also began recalling intricate, completely fabricated details about it. The mind, eager to fill in the blanks, constructed an entire experience from scratch. And it gets even stranger. False memories aren't just an oddity of experimental psychology. They shape history, influence justice, and redefine lives. Think about eyewitness testimony in court cases. A person stands in front of a jury, swearing under oath that they saw the suspect commit the crime. They believe it with every fiber of their being. But time, suggestion, and the reconstructive nature of memory may have altered their recollection. Maybe the real culprit had similar features. Maybe an investigator subtly guided them toward a mistaken identification. And just like that, a person could spend a lifetime in prison for a crime they never committed, all because of a memory that never happened. So if memory, our fundamental tool for knowing what is real, is unreliable, what does that mean for everything we believe about ourselves? What happens when the story you tell yourself about your past might not be your past at all? It means you are not a fixed record of events, but a constantly rewritten narrative. Every time you recall a memory, you change it slightly. Every time you revisit an old experience, you reshape its meaning. Your past is fluid, not set in stone. And here's the most unsettling part. If some of your memories are false, how do you ever know which ones are real? This paradox doesn't just shake the foundation of personal experience. It raises profound philosophical questions about identity and truth. If you can fully believe in something that never happened, then how much of your life is built on illusions? If history itself is written from memories, how much of it is accurate? Yet, perhaps there's a lesson here. Instead of seeing memory as a rigid ledger of truth, we can see it as a living, evolving story. Instead of clinging to certainty, we can embrace the possibility that our own past is more flexible than we realize. So the next time you recall a moment from long ago, ask yourself, did it really happen the way you remember it? Or has time, suggestion, and your own mind rewritten it into something else entirely? And if you can't tell the difference, what does that say about everything you think you know? The Mandela Effect Paradox. If millions of people misremember the same event, was it ever real? You're absolutely certain. You remember it vividly. The Monopoly man has a monocle. The Berenstain Bears were always spelled with an "een," not "ain," and you distinctly recall Darth Vader saying, "Luke, I am your father." But then reality slaps you in the face. The Monopoly man never had a monocle. It has always been the Berenstain Bears. And Darth Vader? He actually said, "No, I am your father." How is that possible? How can millions of people around the world confidently remember something that, according to all existing records, never happened? This is the Mandela Effect Paradox, a phenomenon where large groups of people share the same false memory, creating a bizarre contradiction between personal recollection and objective reality. It's named after Nelson Mandela because, before his actual passing in 2013, countless people around the world were convinced they remembered news reports of his death in the 1980s. They could recall the headlines, they could picture the funeral, and yet none of it happened. So what's going on? Are these just innocent memory errors? Or is there something deeper, something truly reality-bending at play? Let's start with the simplest explanation: collective false memory. Your mind, as reliable as it feels, doesn't store the past like a hard drive. It reconstructs events based on associations, context, and suggestions from those around you. And here's the key: memory is social. You don't just recall things alone, you recall them through interactions, stories, and culture. If enough people confidently misremember something, that version of reality spreads like wildfire. One person's slight memory distortion becomes a collective belief. But this paradox isn't just about faulty memory. It's about the nature of truth itself. If millions of people share the same incorrect memory, does it, in some sense, become real? If so many people believe Darth Vader said "Luke" instead of "no," hasn't that version of the quote taken on a life of its own? Language, after all, evolves through collective understanding, not through fixed historical records. Now, let's go deeper. Some people suggest the Mandela effect points to something more mysterious, perhaps even evidence of parallel realities. What if these collective false memories are glitches, remnants of an alternate timeline that once existed but somehow diverged? What if, at some point, reality shifted, leaving behind lingering echoes of the way things used to be? This might sound like pure science fiction, but think about the unsettling implications. If reality could be rewritten in small ways without us realizing it, how would we ever know? If history itself could be altered, leaving only false memories as traces of what once was, would we be able to distinguish between the truth and the lie? And here's the ultimate paradox. Even if reality didn't change, even if these misremembered events never happened the way we recall them, does it matter? If our perception of the past shapes our experience of the present, then what we believe becomes its own form of truth. Your memories, whether accurate or not, define your understanding of the world. So if millions of people believe something happened, hasn't it, in some way, become real? This paradox forces us to confront an unsettling idea. The past is not fixed. Not in the way we like to think. It lives in our collective memory, which is fluid, fallible, and sometimes utterly deceptive. So next time you remember something that never happened, ask yourself, was it ever real? And if enough people believe in it, does that question even matter? The Confabulation Paradox. If your brain fills in gaps in memory with lies, are they real to you? You're telling a story about your childhood, an old family vacation, a funny moment with a friend, a lesson your father taught you. The details come naturally. You remember the hotel, the exact shade of the carpet, the salty ocean breeze, the way your father's voice carried wisdom in that moment. It all feels real. But what if it isn't? What if the hotel you described never had that carpet? What if the ocean breeze you remember is from a different trip? What if your father never even said those words, but your mind placed them there because the story needed them? This is the Confabulation Paradox, the strange and unsettling reality that your brain, when faced with gaps in memory, doesn't simply leave them blank. Instead, it fills them in with details that never happened, weaving falsehoods so seamlessly into your past that they become indistinguishable from the truth. And here's the paradox. If a memory is fabricated, but you fully believe it, does that make it real to you? Confabulation is not simple lying. A liar knows they are bending the truth. Someone experiencing confabulation, however, has no idea that what they're saying is false. The mind presents the information with absolute conviction. It happens in small ways, like misremembering details of an event, but it can also occur in profound, life-altering ways, particularly in cases of brain injury, dementia, or psychiatric conditions. There are documented cases of patients recounting entire life experiences that never occurred, speaking of childhoods they never had, friendships they never formed, jobs they never worked, and yet, to them, every moment feels as real as yesterday. But it's not just medical cases. You do this too. Your brain is a storyteller, not a historian. Memories aren't recorded like a video. They are reconstructed every time you recall them. And sometimes, when details are missing, your brain fills them in automatically, pulling from assumptions, emotions, and past experiences to create a seamless narrative. You don't notice the changes because the memory still feels complete. And if it feels complete, if it feels real, then in your mind, it is real. Here's where the paradox deepens. If your past is, in part, a patchwork of fabricated moments, details your mind has invented to keep the story coherent, then what does that say about the foundation of your identity? If you define yourself by your experiences, but some of those experiences never actually happen the way you remember, then who are you, really? Confabulation blurs the line between reality and perception. If you tell a story enough times, reinforcing the false details, those details become fixed in your mind. You may even remember them more vividly than the parts that actually happened. The mind doesn't prioritize truth. It prioritizes coherence. This paradox isn't just psychological, it's philosophical. If we trust memory to define our lives, and yet our memories are partly fabricated, then what is truth? Is truth what actually happened, or is it what we believe happened? And if there's no way to distinguish between the two, does it even matter? Confabulation challenges the very idea of an objective past. If your brain is capable of rewriting history without your consent, then how much of your life is built on fiction? And if that fiction is all you've ever known, does that make it your reality? So the next time you tell a story about your past, ask yourself, how much of this is true? And then ask yourself something far more disturbing. Would I even know if it wasn't? The Déjà Vu Paradox. If a moment feels like it's happened before, did it actually? You're walking down the street when suddenly reality glitches, the air thickens, a shiver crawls up your spine. You've been here before, not just in this location, but in this exact moment. The way the light filters through the trees, the rhythm of the footsteps around you, the scent of rain on the pavement. But you haven't been here before. Or have you? This is the Déjà Vu Paradox, the eerie, unshakable sensation that you are reliving a moment that has never actually happened. It's a paradox because it forces you to question time, reality, and your own memory. If something feels familiar, then in a way, isn't it real? And if your brain is telling you that something has happened before, when logically it hasn't, what else is it lying about? Déjà vu is unsettling because it defies explanation. One moment, everything is normal. The next, it's as if a layer of time has collapsed, and you're stuck between the past and present. For a few fleeting seconds, the world feels scripted, as if you're retracing steps in an invisible loop. Then, just as quickly, the feeling fades, leaving only the unsettling question: what just happened? Science tries to explain it. Some researchers suggest déjà vu is a neurological hiccup, where your brain misfires and processes a new experience as if it were a memory. Others believe it's caused by delayed neural processing, where information reaches your awareness a fraction of a second late, creating the illusion that it's happening again. But none of these explanations fully capture the experience. Déjà vu doesn't just feel like recognition, it feels like premonition, as if you are remembering something from the future, not the past. It raises a disturbing question. What if you have lived this moment before? Some theories lean into the paradox. Maybe déjà vu is a glitch in reality, a moment where time folds on itself and you glimpse something outside of the normal flow. Maybe it's a memory from a past life, resurfacing in fragments. Or maybe, in some strange way, you are briefly stepping into an alternate timeline, a version of reality that almost happened, but didn't. And here's where the paradox deepens. If a moment feels real, does it need to have actually happened for it to be real? Think about dreams. You've had dreams so vivid that they linger in your mind for days. Some dreams feel more real than waking life, and sometimes déjà vu feels like one of those dreams bleeding into reality. Could it be that the memories déjà vu triggers aren't from your past, but from your subconscious? An event that was never real, yet somehow is, because your mind insists it is? Now consider this. What if déjà vu isn't about the past at all? What if it's a hint that time isn't as linear as we think? Some physicists suggest that time might be more like a block, all moments, past, present, and future, existing simultaneously. If that's true, déjà vu could be the rare instance where your consciousness skips ahead, experiencing a moment before your body actually arrives in it. And if that's the case, what does that say about free will? If you have already remembered this moment before it happens, then aren't you just following a script that's already been written? The Déjà Vu Paradox forces you to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Either your memory is playing tricks on you, or time is not what you think it is. Either way, reality is not as stable as it seems. So the next time déjà vu hits, stop, look around, ask yourself, is this a memory from my past, or a whisper from my future? The Jamais Vu Paradox. Why do familiar things suddenly seem foreign? You stare at a word, door. You've seen it thousands of times before, written it, read it, spoken it. But now something feels wrong. The letters look alien. The sound of the word in your head seems unnatural. Door, door, door. With each repetition, it loses its meaning, unraveling into something unrecognizable. It's as if your mind has rejected its own knowledge, and for a fleeting moment, you don't understand what you're looking at. But how can that be? How can something so familiar suddenly become strange? This is the Jamais Vu Paradox. the eerie experience of looking at something you know, but feeling as if you're encountering it for the first time. It's the opposite of déjà vu. Instead of sensing that you've been here before, you feel that you haven't, even when you clearly have. The paradox forces you to question how you recognize reality itself. If your brain can reject familiarity, then what else could it be wrong about? Jamais vu is more than just a passing weirdness. It's a glitch in perception. It happens when your brain temporarily fails to connect the dots between recognition and meaning. You see a familiar face, but for a second, they seem like a stranger. You drive a route you've traveled 1,000 times, but suddenly, it feels like unfamiliar territory. You repeat a word until it disintegrates into nonsense. Why does this happen? One explanation is cognitive fatigue. Your brain, overwhelmed, momentarily loses its grip on recognition. It's as if, for just a second, the well-worn pathways of understanding flicker, and in that tiny gap, reality becomes unfamiliar. But here's where the paradox deepens. If something can feel foreign when it isn't, then what defines reality? If your mind, the very tool you use to navigate the world, can abruptly reject something you know to be true, then how much of what you understand is just a fragile mental construct? Jamais vu raises unsettling questions about identity and memory. If your own name suddenly felt strange, if your reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, what would that say about you? Are you just a collection of mental patterns, a series of repeated associations that can, at any moment, unravel? And what if this phenomenon isn't just a quirk of the mind, but a glimpse into a deeper truth? Some suggest that jamais vu is a momentary detachment from reality itself, a tiny window where you perceive the world without the filter of memory and expectation. What if, for those few seconds, you are seeing things as they truly are, not as your mind has categorized them, but in their raw, unprocessed form? If a door is no longer a door, if a word loses its meaning, if a loved one's face briefly becomes a stranger's, then what is reality? Is it a collection of learned associations, or something more fragile, more unstable than we realize? The Jamais Vu Paradox reveals something profound, that familiarity itself is an illusion, a mental construct that can collapse at any moment. If your brain can make the familiar foreign, then perhaps everything you think you know is only as real as your mind allows it to be. So the next time you feel that eerie sensation, that moment where something known turns into something unknown, ask yourself, is this world truly familiar? Or have I only convinced myself that it is? The multiple personalities paradox. If different personalities exist in one brain, which is the real you? You wake up feeling like yourself. Your memories are intact, your personality consistent. You like what you like, hate what you hate, and believe what you believe. You are you, until you're not. Somewhere in the world, someone wakes up in the same body, but as a different person. A new personality with a different voice, different habits, different memories, someone who prefers coffee instead of tea, speaks with a different accent, and carries a trauma the previous self doesn't recall. This is dissociative identity disorder, DID, where multiple, fully formed personalities, each with its own identity, exist within a single brain. They can have different handwriting, different IQs, even different allergies. Some may know about each other, some may not. But here's the paradox. If multiple identities exist in the same body, which one is the real person? This is not a thought experiment. It happens. Patients with DID have been studied, documented, and even brain scanned. It's real. But if self is meant to be singular, if you are supposed to be one person, then how can many exist inside the same mind? And if different personalities emerge at different times, each one experiencing life separately, then which one owns the body? Which one is you? The paradox forces us to confront an unsettling reality. Perhaps the idea of a singular, fixed self is an illusion. Maybe you are not one unified entity, but a collection of different selves, constantly shifting and evolving, even if you don't realize it. Think about how you behave at work versus how you behave at home, the way you speak to a stranger versus a childhood friend, the version of you that thrives under pressure versus the one that crumbles. Are these all just variations of the same person, or are they fragments of different selves temporarily taking control? But here's where the paradox goes deeper. What if you, right now, are not the original version of yourself? If one personality in a DID system can exist without knowing the others, then how can you be sure that you weren't someone else before? What if the real you is dormant, waiting to take back control? What if the you who is reading this is just another temporary identity, unaware of the others lurking in the shadows of your mind? And if that's possible, then what does it mean to be you at all? Some neuroscientists argue that even those without DID still experience a fragmented self, we just don't recognize it. The self we identify with is a mental construct, held together by memory, habit, and narrative. But what if your brain simply isn't allowing you to remember the parts that don't fit? This paradox forces us to question the very foundation of identity. If selfhood is fluid, if multiple versions of you can exist within the same brain, then the idea of a true self becomes meaningless. Maybe there is no real you, only the version that is currently in control. So the next time you feel like a different person than you were yesterday, ask yourself, is that because you've changed, or because another you has simply taken over? The Cryptomnesia Paradox. How can you unknowingly steal an idea and believe it's original? You're struck by inspiration, a brilliant idea, a melody, a line of poetry, pure genius, straight from the depths of your mind. It feels fresh, original, like something no one has ever thought of before. You feel the rush of creativity, the satisfaction of innovation. But what if it isn't yours? What if, somewhere in the past, you read it, heard it, or saw it, then forgot it? What if your brain filed it away, buried it so deep that when it finally resurfaced, you mistook it for your own creation? This is the Cryptomnesia Paradox, the unsettling reality that your mind can borrow an idea from someone else and present it to you as your own. You believe, with complete certainty, that you originated it. But you didn't. The idea was never yours to begin with. How does this happen? Your brain, despite its vast capacity, isn't perfect. It doesn't store information like a neatly organized filing system. Instead, memories get shuffled, blended, and sometimes stripped of their original context. If you absorb an idea but forget where it came from, it can resurface later, disguised as an original thought. It feels authentic because the process of recalling it mirrors the process of creating it. Your brain doesn't distinguish between the two. And here's the paradox. If you sincerely believe you created something, doesn't that, in some way, make it yours? This isn't just a hypothetical dilemma. It happens all the time. Some of the greatest minds in history have been caught in the trap of cryptomnesia. George Harrison of the Beatles unknowingly lifted the melody of He's So Fine when composing My Sweet Lord. Helen Keller wrote a story as a child that she was later accused of unconsciously plagiarizing. Even Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who championed individual genius, admitted that ideas often appear in his mind as if by magic, only to later realize they weren't his at all. But if you don't intend to steal, if you don't know you're copying, then are you truly guilty of plagiarism? What does it mean to be an original thinker if our minds are constantly repurposing ideas without our awareness? If no thought exists in isolation, if every idea is built upon what came before, then is originality even real? And here's where the paradox deepens. What if every new idea is just an old one, recycled through different minds across time? If cryptomnesia is unavoidable, if all creativity is just memory disguised as inspiration, then does anything we create truly belong to us? This paradox forces us to question not just originality, but the very nature of creativity itself. If every thought is a remix, if every innovation is a forgotten echo of something that already existed, then what defines true invention? Is it the idea itself or the way it is expressed? Perhaps the only difference between a borrowed thought and an original one is our belief that we created it. And if that belief is strong enough, then maybe, just maybe, it becomes true. So the next time inspiration strikes, stop and ask yourself, did I think of this? Or did I just forget where I first heard it? The split brain paradox. If the two hemispheres of your brain don't communicate, do you have two minds? You are one person, one mind, one consciousness, or at least that's what you've always believed. But what if you're wrong? What if, locked inside your skull, there aren't one but two separate minds, each with its own desires, preferences, and awareness? And what if the only thing keeping them together was a thin bridge, a bridge that, if severed, would reveal the truth you were never supposed to see? This is the split brain paradox, the unsettling reality that if the two hemispheres of your brain stop communicating, they begin to act as if they are separate individuals, two consciousnesses, two selves, coexisting in one body, yet unaware of each other. The proof? It's not theoretical, it's real. In the 20th century, neurosurgeons performed split brain surgeries on patients with severe epilepsy, severing the corpus callosum, the bundle of nerves that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain. The goal was to stop seizures from spreading between hemispheres, but what happened next changed our understanding of selfhood forever. Patients with a severed corpus callosum experienced something eerie. Their left and right hands would act independently, as if controlled by separate minds. In controlled experiments, researchers would flash an image to the left eye, processed by the right hemisphere, and ask the patient what they saw. The patient, using their language-dominant left hemisphere, would say, "Nothing." But if they were asked to draw what they saw with their left hand, they would sketch the correct image without knowing why. One brain, two selves, one side experiencing reality, the other completely unaware of it. But here's where the paradox deepens. If these two hemispheres can function independently, then which one is you? Is it the left hemisphere, the part that speaks, explains, and forms rational thoughts? Or is it the right, the silent observer, the one that feels but doesn't put things into words? And what if the illusion of unity, the feeling that you are one, single, complete being, is just that, an illusion? What if your mind is already divided, even right now, but the connection between hemispheres tricks you into believing otherwise? This paradox forces us to question what it means to be conscious. If the brain can be split, then so can the self. If your hemispheres could be severed right now and each continued to function on its own, then were you ever truly one person to begin with? Maybe, just maybe, you are not a singular mind. You never were. You are simply a negotiation between two competing selves, an uneasy alliance between two halves that don't always agree, but communicate just well enough to keep the illusion going. And that begs the final, most unsettling question of all. If you can be split in two, were you ever whole? The identity persistence paradox. If all your cells are replaced, every 7 years, are you still the same person? Right now, the body you inhabit, the skin you touch, the bones that hold you up, the neurons firing in your brain, is not the same body you had 7 years ago. Not a single one of those original cells remains. They've all been replaced, piece by piece, like a ship that's had every plank swapped out over time. So here's the paradox. If every part of you has been replaced, then are you still you? This is the identity persistence paradox, the unsettling realization that your body is in a constant state of renewal, yet your sense of self remains intact. You claim to be the same person you were a decade ago, but physically, you are not. Every cell in your skin, your organs, even your bones, gone, replaced by new ones. And yet somehow, your memories, your thoughts, your you-ness persist. But how? If you take apart an old watch and replace every single gear, is it still the same watch? If you rebuild a car, swapping out each part one by one, does it remain the same vehicle? At what point does change erase identity? Your body is in a state of constant flux. Skin cells last only a few weeks before being shed. Red blood cells live about 4 months. Even your bones, seemingly unchanging, are slowly broken down and rebuilt, replacing themselves roughly every 7 years. The only exception? Some neurons in your brain, which can last a lifetime, but even they rewire, change, and restructure. So if you are physically different from the person you once were, what is the you that remains? Perhaps it's your memories, the continuity of experience, the long thread of recollection, is what makes you feel like the same person despite the physical transformation. But even memory is unreliable, fragile, distorted, constantly rewritten. If your past is mutable and your body is temporary, then what anchors your identity at all? Here's where the paradox deepens. If your body's gradual transformation doesn't make you a different person, then what would? If you lost a limb, would you still be you? What about a heart transplant? A brain transplant? If your consciousness could be copied and placed into another body, which version would be the real you? Or maybe you are nothing more than a process, a pattern that continues even as the physical matter changes, like a flame that moves from one log to another, never made of the same atoms, yet still the same fire. Maybe you are not a fixed entity at all, just a collection of ever-changing parts, bound together by the illusion of continuity. But if identity is just an illusion, if you are not the same person you were years ago, then who are you now? And if every piece of you will change again in the years to come, then will the future you still be you? Or will they just be someone else, pretending to be the person you think you are? The dream reality paradox. If your brain can create lifelike dreams, how do you know you're awake? You open your eyes. The world around you feels real. Your hands, your breath, the texture of the chair beneath you. You remember what you did yesterday. You know where you are. Everything makes sense. But does it? Because last night, you were just as convinced that your dream was real. You ran from danger. You flew over cities. You spoke to people who didn't exist, all with the same certainty that you were awake. You felt things. You believed in them. Only when you woke up did the illusion shatter. So here's the paradox. If you've been fooled before, how do you know you aren't being fooled right now? Your brain, the one thing you trust to tell you what's real, is also capable of fabricating entire worlds while you sleep. It can construct landscapes, simulate sensations, and create a seamless experience indistinguishable from reality. Dreams have rules, logic, even continuity, until they don't, until something breaks, until you wake up. But if you can't tell the difference between a dream and waking life while you're inside it, then what separates this moment, right now, from being another deception? Maybe this reality is just another dream, one you haven't woken up from yet. This is the dream reality paradox, the disturbing realization that if your brain can generate a world so vivid that you believe in it completely, then your waking life too might be nothing more than another dream. Philosophers and scientists have wrestled with this for centuries. Descartes, in his famous Meditations, asked, "What if all of life is a dream? If our senses can be deceived, how can we ever trust that they are telling us the truth?" The answer: we can't. And modern neuroscience only deepens the mystery. Studies show that while dreaming, the brain activates in nearly the same way it does when awake. The same neural circuits fire, the same emotional responses trigger. In fact, dreams can even feel more real than waking life, colors more vivid, emotions more intense. Some people have reported dreams so powerful that they remember them as clearly as real-life events. So what, then, is the difference? If a dream can be indistinguishable from reality, then how can you ever be sure which one you're in? And here's where the paradox takes its final, most unsettling turn. What if waking life is a dream? A longer, more structured, more stable one, but a dream nonetheless. What if death is simply the moment you wake up, realizing that everything you've ever experienced was just part of a greater illusion? The dream reality paradox forces us to confront the limits of perception. You feel awake, but you've felt awake in dreams before. You believe this is real, but you've believed false realities before. So before you move on, take a second. Look around. Ask yourself, is this real? And if it wasn't, how would you know? The inattentional blindness paradox. If your brain ignores something right in front of you, did you ever see it? You think you see the world as it is. Your eyes take in everything around you, the colors, the movement, the shifting details of life. If something important happens right in front of you, you'd notice it. You wouldn't just miss something obvious, would you? But you would. And you do. Right now, as you read this, there are things in your environment that your brain is actively deleting, not because your eyes failed to capture them, but because your mind decided they weren't important. And what your mind deems unimportant might be everything. This is the inattentional blindness paradox, the disturbing realization that you can look directly at something and never truly see it. If your brain decides to ignore it, was it ever there at all? Think this sounds impossible? Psychologists have proven otherwise. In the now famous invisible gorilla experiment, participants were asked to watch a video of people passing a basketball and count the number of passes. In the middle of the scene, a person in a gorilla suit walked through, paused, pounded their chest, and walked off. The result? More than half of the viewers never saw the gorilla. They looked directly at it, yet their brains erased it from reality. Now, ask yourself, if you can miss something as ridiculous as a person in a gorilla suit, what else have you failed to see? Your brain is an efficiency machine. It filters out what it deems irrelevant to help you focus. That's why you don't constantly notice the feeling of your clothes against your skin or the faint hum of distant traffic. Your mind chooses what to bring into your awareness. But here's the paradox. If your brain ignores something, did you ever truly perceive it? Imagine witnessing a crime, looking directly at the culprit, but failing to recall their face because your attention was on something else. Imagine reading a book, scanning each word, only to realize you absorbed none of it. If your mind filtered something out, then for all intents and purposes, it never existed in your experience. This paradox goes beyond perception. It forces us to question the nature of reality itself. If you can only process what your brain allows, then your version of reality is not the full picture. It's a curated illusion, shaped not by what exists, but by what your mind chooses to acknowledge. And here's where it gets even stranger. If something happens in front of you, but your brain filters it out, does it matter that it happened at all? If an event is never perceived, never stored in memory, and never affects you in any way, then for all practical purposes, it may as well have never happened. Which means that your reality is not based on the truth. It's based on what your brain decides is worth noticing. So take a moment. Look around. What are you not seeing? What might be right in front of you? Something bizarre, something shocking, something life-changing that your brain has already erased. And if you'll never know what you've missed, then ask yourself this: how much of reality have you already failed to notice? The Blindness Paradox. If you don't notice small changes in a scene, is reality stable? You're standing in a familiar place, your living room, your office, a coffee shop you visit every morning. You know this space. You could close your eyes and describe it perfectly. But now, something changes. A picture frame is slightly tilted. A chair moves an inch to the left. The barista behind the counter is a completely different person than the one who took your order a minute ago. And yet, you notice nothing. This is the Blindness Paradox, the unsettling reality that your brain misses massive changes happening right in front of you. You assume the world is stable, that what you see remains constant. But in truth, your mind isn't tracking reality, it's predicting it. And when reality shifts, even in obvious ways, you might never realize it happened. Psychologists have tested this, and the results are disturbing. In one study, a researcher would ask a pedestrian for directions. Midway through the conversation, two workers carrying a large object would walk between them, briefly blocking their view. In that split second, the original researcher was swapped out with someone else. A different person, different clothes, different face, and yet the majority of people never noticed. Let that sink in. They were looking directly at a person, engaged in conversation, and their brain failed to register that the person changed entirely. This raises an unsettling question. If reality can change around you without you realizing, then is your world really as stable as you believe? The truth is, your brain doesn't take in every detail of your surroundings. It fills in gaps, assumes consistency, and only notices what it deems important. It's not recording reality like a camera. It's constructing a version of it based on expectation. That's why small, and even major, changes can slip by undetected. But here's where the paradox gets deeper. If change can occur without you perceiving it, then what defines your experience of reality? If the world you live in can shift without your awareness, then how do you ever know that what you see now is the same as what was there a moment ago? And here's the most unsettling part. What if things are changing all the time, right now? As you read this, what if the world isn't stable at all, but constantly in flux, shifting beneath your perception while your mind tricks you into believing it's unchanged? If your memory is unreliable, if your senses are selective, if your perception is blind to transformation, then how much of reality do you really see? And if you can't detect the changes, does it even matter if reality is changing at all? The Phantom Limb Paradox. How can an amputated limb still feel pain? Your hand itches, not a little, intensely. You feel every nerve buzzing, every sensation screaming for relief. But there's a problem. You don't have a hand. It was amputated months ago. The flesh, the bone, the nerves, gone. And yet, the sensation remains. You feel your fingers curling, your palm clenching, pain radiating from a limb that no longer exists. But how can something that isn't there still hurt? This is the Phantom Limb Paradox, the eerie reality that a body part can vanish, yet refuse to be forgotten. Your brain doesn't just register pain, it creates it. And when the limb disappears, the pain does not. It lingers, trapped in a loop of sensation, detached from physical reality. How does this happen? Your brain has a map of your body, a neural blueprint in the somatosensory cortex that tells you where your limbs are, how they move, and how they feel. When a limb is lost, this map doesn't simply erase it. Instead, the brain keeps searching for signals that no longer come, like a radio scanning for a station that no longer exists. The result? Phantom pain. A body part that isn't there still feels real because your brain refuses to let go of its presence. But here's where the paradox deepens. If sensation is not dependent on physical presence, if your brain can generate the experience of a missing limb, then how much of your body is real and how much is just perception? Right now, you assume that your body is there because you feel it, your fingers typing, your feet on the floor, your breath filling your lungs. But if an amputated limb can still feel, then what if your entire body is nothing more than a projection of your brain's expectations? And if your brain can make you feel pain from something that no longer exists, then how do you ever know that your sensations are telling you the truth? This paradox forces us to reconsider what real means. If an illusion of pain is indistinguishable from actual pain, then what makes pain real? Is your suffering in the limb itself, or in your mind's refusal to forget it? The phantom limb paradox is more than a medical mystery. It is a philosophical dilemma that challenges the very nature of experience. If you can feel something that doesn't exist, then what else in your reality is a phantom? And if you can't trust your own body to tell you what's real, what can you trust? The McGurk effect paradox. Why does your brain change? What you hear based on what you see? You hear a sound, a simple syllable, ba, ba, ba. You're certain of it. Your ears don't lie. But then something shifts. You watch a person's lips move as they say the same sound, except now, suddenly, you hear da, da, da. The audio never changed, but your perception did. Your ears told you one thing, your eyes told you another, and your brain, caught in the contradiction, rewrote reality to fit the story. This is the McGurk effect paradox, the eerie realization that what you see can alter what you hear, so much so that you will mishear something even when the actual sound remains unchanged. Your mind does not just receive information, it constructs it. And sometimes it prioritizes vision over sound, even at the cost of the truth. Think about what this means. You trust your ears. You believe that what you hear is what was said, but the McGurk effect proves that you are not hearing reality. You are hearing your brain's best guess. If your eyes present conflicting data, your perception shifts to match it. You don't even notice the deception. Your brain edits the experience so seamlessly that you believe it to be real. But here's the paradox. If what you hear can be changed by what you see, then is sound ever truly objective? This effect isn't just a weird quirk, it's a fundamental breakdown of perception. If your senses can be altered so easily, then what happens to everything else you think you perceive correctly? How many times has your brain rewritten reality without you realizing? Now, take this idea further. What if two people are hearing the exact same words, but seeing different things? One might hear ba, the other da, both convinced their experience is the truth. If reality shifts based on perspective, then what version of it is real? And here's where the paradox deepens. If you can be tricked into hearing something that wasn't said, how much of your past conversations, your arguments, your memories of what someone told you are built on false perceptions? If you misheard something but believed it with absolute certainty, then was it ever wrong to you? The McGurk effect. Paradox forces us to confront an unsettling truth. What we perceive is not reality. It is a constructed illusion, a fragile mix of sensory input and interpretation. Your brain does not always show you what is. It shows you what makes the most sense to you. So the next time you swear you heard something a certain way, ask yourself, did you? Or did your brain just decide what it wanted you to hear? The visual saccade paradox. Your eyes jump constantly, but why don't you perceive motion blur? Right now, your eyes are darting all over this page. You don't notice it, but they are. Every few milliseconds, your eyeballs make rapid, jerky movements called saccades, shifting your gaze from one point to another. In fact, if you looked in a mirror and tried to watch your own eyes move, you wouldn't be able to see them shift. But here's the paradox. If your eyes are constantly jumping, then why does the world appear smooth and stable? Why don't you see motion blur, streaks, or disorienting flickers every time your vision shifts? This is the visual saccade paradox, the unsettling realization that your brain is actively erasing the visual chaos happening right in front of you. Every time your eyes move, your brain shuts down your perception of motion, essentially creating a moment of blindness. And yet, you never experience gaps in reality. Your mind stitches the pieces together seamlessly, convincing you that your view of the world is continuous, even though it isn't. The illusion is so powerful that you don't even notice it happening. Right now, your brain is deleting and replacing fragments of your visual experience, yet you feel like you're seeing everything in real time. But here's where the paradox deepens. If you don't perceive something, does it exist for you at all? For a fraction of a second, every time you move your eyes, the world vanishes. The brain suppresses visual input, preventing you from noticing the transition between one fixation and the next. And then, without your awareness, it fills in the missing information as if nothing ever happened. It even predicts what should be there to smooth out any gaps. In other words, your perception of the world is partially a fabrication. You are not actually seeing a continuous reality. You are experiencing a carefully edited version, curated by your brain to feel seamless. Now ask yourself, if your brain can hide the fact that you're blind multiple times per second, what else is it hiding? What if there are moments, events, changes in reality that slip by, unnoticed, because your brain decided they weren't worth perceiving? If your vision can be edited without your consent, then how much of what you see is truly real, and how much is just a polished reconstruction? The visual saccade paradox forces you to confront an unsettling truth. Your perception is not an objective recording of reality. It is a carefully constructed illusion. You think you're seeing everything, but your brain is already deciding what you are allowed to see. So the next time you glance around the room, take a moment to question how much of what you see is truly there, and how much has already been erased. The Auditory Hallucination Paradox. If you hear voices in your head, are they real to you? You're alone in a quiet room when suddenly you hear it. A voice. Maybe it whispers your name. Maybe it mutters something unintelligible. Maybe it even carries on a full conversation. But no one is there. Nothing is speaking, except, in a way, something is, because you heard it. This is the Auditory Hallucination Paradox, the unsettling reality that a sound, even when it has no physical source, can still be real to you. Your ears never picked up the sound waves, no vibrations traveled through the air, and yet your brain generated the experience of hearing it anyway, as vividly as if someone had spoken right next to you. So here's the paradox. If a voice feels real, sounds real, and is experienced as real, then isn't it, in some sense, real? Your brain is not just a receiver of reality, it is a creator of it. It constructs the world you perceive, deciding what is heard, what is seen, what is felt, and sometimes it fabricates things so convincingly that you can't tell the difference between perception and illusion. Studies show that auditory hallucinations are not rare. Many people hear phantom sounds, footsteps in an empty house, music when none is playing, a voice calling their name in an empty space. These experiences are often indistinguishable from actual sounds. Brain scans even reveal that the same auditory processing regions activate whether a sound is real or imagined. But here's where the paradox deepens. If your brain treats hallucinated sounds the same way as real ones, then how can you ever be certain that what you hear is truly real? What if right now, in this moment, a sound in your environment isn't actually there, but your brain is filling in gaps without telling you? What if entire conversations, songs, or memories of sound are just echoes created by your mind, without any external source? And if your brain can generate a sound without an external trigger, then is all hearing just an internal experience disguised as an external one? Philosophers and neuroscientists have wrestled with this question. Does something have to exist outside of your mind to be considered real? If you experience something fully, if it triggers emotions, thoughts, and reactions, then how different is it from something that actually happened? This paradox forces us to confront the limits of perception. If what we hear is not just received, but constructed by our minds, then what else in our experience is a carefully crafted illusion? So the next time you hear a voice when no one is there, ask yourself, is it unreal just because no one else can hear it? Or does reality depend on the one who perceives it? The rubber hand illusion paradox. If a fake hand feels like yours, is it part of your body? You sit at a table, your real hand hidden behind a screen. In front of you lies a lifeless rubber hand, positioned exactly where your real one should be. A researcher begins stroking both your concealed real hand and the fake hand at the same time in the same way. At first, you know it's just an illusion. The rubber hand is fake, the touch isn't real, but then something shifts. A strange tingling sensation creeps in. Suddenly, the rubber hand feels like yours. Your brain has made a decision without your permission. It has adopted a foreign object into your sense of self. This is the rubber hand illusion paradox. The bizarre reality that your brain doesn't just perceive your body as it is, but as it believes it should be. And if your brain can be tricked into feeling ownership over something that isn't you, then what exactly defines your body? You think of yourself as a singular fixed entity. Your arms are yours because you feel them. Your legs belong to you because you control them. But this experiment proves that body ownership is just an illusion your brain constructs. If a fake limb can feel like part of you after mere minutes of sensory manipulation, then how much of your body is truly yours, and how much is just what your brain accepts as you? But here's where the paradox deepens. If your brain can adopt a fake hand, can it also reject a real one? Patients with body integrity dysphoria feel like certain limbs, sometimes an arm, sometimes a leg, don't belong to them. Their brain fails to recognize those limbs as part of their body, leading to the overwhelming desire to amputate them. The same system that allows you to adopt a rubber hand can also abandon your real ones. So now the question grows darker. If your sense of self is malleable, if your brain decides what is you and what isn't, then how can you ever trust that your body is actually yours? Maybe yourself is not a fixed reality, but a negotiation, a fragile agreement between your mind and the physical world. Maybe you don't own your body as much as you think you do. And if that's the case, then ask yourself, are you living inside a body? Or is your body just an idea your brain hasn't questioned yet? The Synesthesia Paradox. If you see, sounds, or taste words, which sense is real? You hear a name, David. But you don't just hear it, you see it. Maybe it's a deep shade of blue, or it flashes in your mind as a streak of yellow. Or maybe you're reading these words, but they aren't just black letters on a screen. They have a taste. The word Tuesday tastes like cinnamon. The number 7 feels rough, like sandpaper. A violin's high note sends a burst of purple through your mind. Welcome to the Synesthesia Paradox, the strange and fascinating phenomenon where senses bleed into each other. merging in ways that shouldn't be possible. You think you experience the world through separate channels: sight, sound, taste, touch. But for people with synesthesia, those boundaries don't exist. And here's the paradox. If one person hears music, but another sees it as colors, then which version of reality is correct? Science tells us that synesthesia is a blending of sensory pathways in the brain, neurons that process different senses: sound, sight, taste, crosswire, creating dual sensory experiences that most people never have. To a synesthete, the world isn't just heard or seen. It's a multi-sensory fusion where letters have personalities, colors trigger emotions, and time itself has a shape. But this paradox isn't just about unusual perception. It forces us to question the very nature of reality. If the brain of a synesthete creates extra layers of sensory input, then what's stopping your brain from removing layers from your perception? What if synesthesia isn't an anomaly? What if it's a glimpse of how reality actually is, and the rest of us are simply experiencing a reduced version of it? Think about it. Right now, your brain is filtering out more than it's allowing you to perceive. You aren't consciously aware of the feeling of your clothes on your skin, the sound of the distant hum of appliances, or the millions of microscopic details in your environment. If your brain is already deciding what parts of reality you experience, then how much of the world are you actually missing? And if two people perceive the same stimulus in completely different ways, a sound to one person, a color to another, then who gets to define what is real? What if there is no single reality, only individual versions shaped by the limitations of our senses? What if we don't perceive the world as it is, but only as our brains allow us to see it? So the next time you hear music, taste a word, or see a number that feels wrong, ask yourself, is my brain showing me the full picture? Or am I only experiencing a tiny fraction of what reality truly is? The face recognition paradox. If your brain sees faces in random objects, what defines a face? You're walking down the street when suddenly you see it. A face. Two eyes, a nose, a mouth, watching you. Except it isn't. It's just a car's headlights and grille, or a house with two windows and a door, or a piece of toast with a strangely human-like scorch mark. And yet, for that split second, your brain was convinced it saw a face. This is the face recognition paradox, the bizarre reality that your brain is so wired to detect faces that it sees them even when they don't exist. You don't just recognize faces, you impose them onto the world around you, turning inanimate objects into something almost human. But here's the paradox. If a collection of random shapes can trigger the same recognition as an actual human face, then what exactly makes a face real? Your brain is an expert at face detection. It's one of the first things you learned as a baby, identifying faces, reading expressions, distinguishing friend from stranger. But this ability is so deeply ingrained that it sometimes backfires, creating false positives. The phenomenon is called Pareidolia, and it happens to everyone. You see a smiling face in the moon, a frowning expression in a tree's bark, an eerie, watching presence in the patterns of a curtain. Your mind doesn't just look for faces, it expects them. And when it finds something that even vaguely resembles a face, it fills in the details, creating an illusion so strong that it feels real. But this raises a disturbing question. If a face can be real to your brain even when it isn't, then what defines a face at all? Is it simply a pattern that fits the template? Two dots and a line? A symmetrical arrangement? If an object that merely suggests a face can fool your brain, then does that mean your perception of real faces is just another illusion, just a more convincing one? And what if the way you see actual human faces is just another case of your brain filling in gaps? Scientists know that face recognition is partially predictive. Your mind doesn't just see a face, It guesses what it should look like based on experience. That's why you sometimes misrecognize people, or why a blurry photo still looks like a person. Your brain isn't detecting faces, it's expecting them. So what does this mean for reality? If you can be tricked into seeing a face where none exists, then how can you ever be certain that the faces you do see, on strangers, on loved ones, are truly what they appear to be? Maybe a face isn't a fixed reality. Maybe it's just a pattern your brain constructs, an illusion stitched together to make sense of the world. So the next time you see a face staring at you from the front of a car, ask yourself, did I recognize it? Or did my brain just create it? The Ganzfeld effect paradox. If sensory deprivation creates hallucinations, does reality depend on input? Close your eyes. Silence surrounds you. No sounds, no movement, no change in light, just stillness. At first, it's peaceful, but then something strange happens. A whisper that no one spoke, a flicker of light in the darkness, a shadow that shouldn't be there. The longer you stay in this void, the more your mind begins filling it with something else. This is the Ganzfeld effect paradox, the eerie reality that when your brain is deprived of sensory input, it doesn't experience nothing. Instead, it manufactures something: hallucinations, distortions, entire false realities. So, here's the paradox. If the absence of input causes your brain to create an alternate reality, then is reality itself just a product of sensory stimulation? The Ganzfeld effect occurs when you are exposed to an unstructured, uniform environment, a completely silent room, a featureless surface, or constant white noise. Without variation, your brain, accustomed to interpreting change, movement, and contrast, begins to invent experiences to compensate for the lack of input. Scientists have tested this by placing subjects in a Ganzfeld setup, covering their eyes with a smooth, glowing red light, and playing static noise in their ears. Within minutes, people begin to see and hear things that aren't there. Voices, figures, shapes. Their brains refuse to accept emptiness. But here's where the paradox deepens. If the brain hallucinates in the absence of stimuli, then how do you know it isn't hallucinating when stimuli are present? What if reality is nothing more than the mind's best attempt at making sense of the sensory data it receives? What if, without external input, it would simply generate its own world, one that feels just as real? And if this is true, then how do you prove that the reality you experience every day is any more real than the one your mind invents in sensory deprivation? If the brain can create fully convincing sensory experiences from nothing, then what's stopping it from shaping the world around you in ways you don't even realize? This paradox forces us to ask a disturbing question. Is reality something external, or is it simply whatever your mind constructs from the input it receives? And if reality depends on sensory input, then how much of what you see, hear, and feel is real? And how much is just your brain filling in the gaps? The Cognitive Dissonance Paradox. Why does your brain defend beliefs? Even when proven wrong, you consider yourself a rational person. You believe that when presented with undeniable facts, you will adjust your views accordingly. If you are proven wrong, you'll accept the truth, right? But then, something strange happens. You come across evidence that contradicts a long-held belief, maybe about politics, health, or even a personal experience. The proof is right in front of you, and yet, instead of changing your mind, you resist, you rationalize, you find ways to dismiss the new information. You double down on the very belief that has just been proven false. Why? This is the Cognitive Dissonance Paradox, the unsettling reality that when faced with conflicting information, your brain is more likely to defend what it already believes rather than accept the truth. The more undeniable the contradiction, the more desperately your mind fights against it. But here's the paradox. If humans are supposed to be logical, then why does proof make us defend falsehoods even harder? The answer lies in cognitive dissonance, a psychological phenomenon where holding two conflicting ideas at the same time creates deep discomfort. Your brain hates this feeling. It craves internal consistency. And when reality threatens to unravel your established beliefs, your mind doesn't change the belief. It distorts reality instead. Think about a person who has spent years believing in a conspiracy theory. If they are presented with undeniable proof that the conspiracy is false, they don't simply accept it and move on. Instead, they find ways to reinterpret the evidence to fit their existing worldview. The government must be hiding something. The data must be fake. The people presenting the proof must have an agenda. The belief remains intact, not because it's true, but because changing it would be too psychologically painful. But here's where the paradox deepens. If your brain is willing to rewrite reality to avoid discomfort, then how many of your own beliefs are built on illusions? How many things do you hold as truth simply because your mind refuses to process the alternative? If facts alone aren't enough to change someone's mind, then how can you ever be sure that what you believe isn't just a carefully constructed defense mechanism? And here's the most unsettling question of all. If your brain will fight to protect a belief, even when it's false, then how do you ever know when you're actually right? The cognitive dissonance paradox forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We don't believe things because they are true. We believe them because they fit our existing reality. So the next time you feel the instinct to reject something that contradicts your beliefs, stop. Ask yourself, am I seeing the truth or just the version of reality my mind refuses to let go of? The imposter syndrome. Paradox. If you doubt your success, despite evidence, which is real, you've achieved something meaningful. Maybe you landed a dream job, received an award, or accomplished something that others admire. People congratulate you, recognize your talent, and see you as successful. But you don't. Instead of feeling accomplished, you feel like a fraud, like you just got lucky, like any moment now, someone will realize you don't actually belong. This is the imposter syndrome paradox, the strange contradiction where you can objectively succeed, yet still feel like you don't deserve it. The evidence says one thing, but your mind tells a different story. But here's the paradox. If success is defined by external recognition, and you have that recognition, then why doesn't it feel real? Imposter syndrome is a mental trap where your perception of yourself doesn't match reality. Even when you have proof of your abilities, achievements, compliments, qualifications, your brain discounts them. It tells you that other people are truly competent, while you are just pretending. You attribute your success to luck, timing, or other people's mistakes, anything except your own skill. But if success is measured by external validation and the world sees you as successful, then who is right? Your mind, which constantly doubts you, or the people who recognize your achievements? And here's where the paradox deepens. If you weren't actually competent, you wouldn't be doubting yourself in the first place. Studies show that the people most likely to experience imposter syndrome are often high achievers, perfectionists, leaders, experts. The fact that you worry about being not good enough proves that you care about competence, which means you are more likely to be competent. So now you're trapped in a paradox. The more you doubt yourself, the more likely it is that you are actually capable. But here's the unsettling part. If your mind can ignore proof of your success, what else is it distorting? If reality can be overridden by your own perception, then how much of what you know about yourself is simply a lie your brain insists on telling? The imposter syndrome paradox forces you to ask a difficult question. If the entire world sees you as successful and you are the only one who doesn't, who is more likely to be wrong? So the next time you feel like a fraud, stop and ask yourself, is this feeling real? Or is it just the last trick my mind is playing to keep me from realizing my own worth? The Overconfidence Paradox. Why do the least skilled people think they're the smartest? You've met them before. The person who barely understands a topic but speaks with absolute certainty. The coworker who knows nothing about your job but insists they could do it better. The stranger online who confidently spreads misinformation without ever questioning themselves. Meanwhile, the true experts, the ones who actually know what they're talking about, doubt themselves, hedge their statements, and constantly second-guess their knowledge. Why does this happen? This is the Overconfidence Paradox, the disturbing reality that the people who know the least often think they know the most, while those who are highly skilled are the ones most likely to question their abilities. It's a psychological effect known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, where incompetence and ignorance don't just lead to mistakes, they also lead to overconfidence. The less you know, the less you understand how much you don't know. You lack the skill to recognize your own incompetence, so instead of feeling uncertain, you feel overly sure of yourself. And here's the paradox. If people who know the least are the most confident, then how can confidence ever be trusted as a sign of competence? Think about it. We are wired to equate confidence with ability. A person who speaks with certainty seems like they must be right. A hesitant, self-questioning person seems less capable. But this paradox proves that confidence is often the worst possible measure of intelligence. The true experts, the ones who have spent years mastering a subject, understand its complexity. They see the gaps in their knowledge. They know how much there is to learn. That's why they hesitate. That's why they qualify their statements. That's why they say, I could be wrong. Meanwhile, the least knowledgeable person doesn't see the complexity. They don't recognize the gaps, so they assume there are no gaps. But here's where the paradox deepens. If you don't know what you don't know, then how can you ever be sure you aren't one of these people? Right now, what if something you feel 100% sure about is completely wrong? What if the confidence you have in your own understanding is actually a sign that you don't understand it at all? And if confidence is not proof of competence, then how many of the people we listen to, leaders, influencers, so-called experts, are actually just loudly wrong? The overconfidence paradox forces us to confront a disturbing truth. Certainty is often a sign of ignorance, while doubt is often a sign of intelligence. The people who are most willing to say, I might be wrong, are the ones most likely to be right. So the next time someone speaks with absolute certainty, ask yourself, are they truly an expert? Or do they just not know enough to realize how wrong they might be? The Anchoring Bias Paradox. Why does the first piece of information you hear distort your judgment? You're in a store shopping for a watch. The first one you see costs $5,000. Way too expensive. Then, a second watch catches your eye, sleek, stylish, and priced at $800. Compared to the first one, $800 seems like a bargain. But here's the catch. If you had seen the $800 watch first, it would have felt expensive. You wouldn't have thought of it as a deal. So what changed? The watch, the price, or just your perception? This is the Anchoring Bias Paradox. The strange reality that the first piece of information you receive anchors your thinking, distorting everything that comes after. Your brain latches onto the first number, fact, or idea, and every future decision is subconsciously pulled toward it, even when it's completely irrelevant. But here's the paradox. If the first number or idea you hear can alter your perception, then how can you ever trust your own judgment? Think about it. Your choices, beliefs, and opinions should be based on logic, reason, and careful evaluation. But your brain isn't rational, it's suggestible. It gets stuck on the first input it receives. If that first input is wrong, misleading, or random, your entire decision-making process gets distorted and you don't even realize it. Studies prove this effect is shockingly powerful. In one experiment, participants were asked to spin a wheel, rigged to land on either 10 or 65, and then guess how many African countries were in the UN. Those who got 10 guessed lower numbers, while those who got 65 guessed higher numbers, even though the wheel had nothing to do with the actual answer. The anchor, a meaningless number, completely warped their judgment. And here's where the paradox deepens. If the first number you see can unconsciously manipulate you, then how many of your opinions, financial choices, and life decisions were shaped by an anchor you never even noticed? What if the first price you heard for a car skewed your entire sense of what was fair? What if the first statistic you read about a political issue shaped your entire stance before you ever considered another perspective? What if the first salary number in a negotiation tilted the final deal in someone else's favor without you realizing? If your judgment is so easily manipulated, then how can you ever be sure you're thinking objectively? The anchoring bias paradox forces us to ask an unsettling question. Is your opinion truly your own, or is it just a reaction to the first idea that got stuck in your mind? So the next time you make a decision, stop and ask yourself, am I choosing this because it's right, or just because it was the first thing I heard? The framing effect paradox. How can the same information lead to opposite decisions depending on wording? A doctor presents you with a choice. You need surgery. There are two ways to think about the outcome. Option A, 90% of patients survive this procedure. Option B, 10% of patients die from this procedure. Both statements say the exact same thing, but they don't feel the same, do they? The first one reassures you, the second one unsettles you. If given the choice, more people will opt for surgery when it's framed in terms of survival rather than death. But why? This is the framing effect paradox, the strange reality that the way information is presented can completely change how we perceive it, even if the facts remain identical. And here's the paradox. If a simple shift in wording can alter your decisions, then how can you ever be sure you're making a rational choice? Your brain is wired to react differently to gains versus losses, safety versus risk, positivity versus negativity, even when the underlying reality remains unchanged. Marketers, politicians, and media outlets exploit this constantly using language to shape perception. A 95% fat-free snack sounds healthy. A 5% fat snack sounds indulgent. A company saying they had 80% customer satisfaction sounds great. Saying they had 20% dissatisfied customers raises red flags. A news story that states unemployment dropped from 6% to 5% feels optimistic. A story saying 5% of people are still unemployed feels pessimistic. Same reality, different reactions. But here's where the paradox deepens. If perception can be manipulated this easily, then how many of your own beliefs, fears, and preferences were shaped by framing, without you realizing? What if you declined an opportunity not because it was bad, but because it was framed negatively? What if you took a risk not because it was logical, but because it was framed in a way that made it feel safer than it was? If identical facts can lead to opposite decisions depending on how they're phrased, then how much of your reality is actually shaped by language rather than truth? The framing effect paradox forces us to ask an unsettling question. Are you making choices based on facts or just reacting to how they were presented? So the next time you're given an option, stop and ask yourself, am I making the best decision, or am I just falling for the way it was framed? The reverse psychology paradox. If you're told not to do something, why do you want to do it more? Don't think about a pink elephant. Too late. It's already there, clear as day, standing in the middle of your mind, uninvited and impossible to ignore. But why? Why, the moment you're told not to do something, does your brain instantly want to do it? Why does a forbidden action suddenly feel irresistible? This is the reverse psychology paradox, the strange reality that when you are told not to do something, you suddenly feel a stronger urge to do it. Whether it's a rule, a restriction, or a simple warning, the very act of limitation fuels your desire. But here's the paradox. If free will means making your own choices, then why do external restrictions influence you so easily? Psychologists call this reactance, the mental pushback we feel when our freedom is threatened. Your brain interprets restrictions as a challenge. It doesn't like being told what to do, so it rebels, even if the restriction is in your best interest. This is why children touch the "do not touch" button. Why a forbidden romance feels thrilling. Why people speed when they see a speed limit sign. Why a book labeled banned suddenly becomes a must-read. The very act of restriction creates attraction. And here's where the paradox deepens. If the desire to do something increases the moment it's forbidden, then how much of what you want is actually based on free choice? Would you want it if no one told you not to? Or is your desire just a reaction to being told no? Marketers and politicians understand this well. Want people to buy something? Tell them it's limited edition or almost sold out. Want someone to pay attention? Tell them they wouldn't understand. Want to make an idea more appealing? Censor it and watch curiosity skyrocket. But here's the most unsettling question. If your brain instinctively pushes back against rules, then how many of your choices aren't choices at all, but just reflexive defiance? The reverse psychology paradox forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth. Do you truly want something, or do you only want it because you were told you couldn't have it? So the next time you feel an urge to do the forbidden, stop and ask yourself, is this my real desire, or just my brain throwing a tantrum over its lost freedom? The placebo effect paradox. How does your brain heal itself? Just because it believes it took medicine, you have a headache, a bad one. You take a pill, wash it down with water, and within minutes, the pain begins to fade. Relief washes over you. The medicine worked, except the pill you took wasn't medicine at all. It was just sugar. Nothing inside it should have helped you. And yet, you got better anyway. This is the placebo effect paradox, the incredible reality that your brain can heal itself, reduce pain, and even fight disease, simply because it believes it received treatment. A completely inactive substance, a sugar pill, a saline injection, even a fake surgery, can produce real, measurable medical improvements just because you expect it to work. But here's the paradox. If your body can heal based on belief alone, then what does that say about the nature of illness, and even reality itself? Doctors have studied the placebo effect for decades, and the results are staggering. Placebos have been shown to reduce pain, sometimes as effectively as actual painkillers, improve depression simply by convincing the brain it's receiving real antidepressants, lower blood pressure, improve sleep, and even boost the immune system, all with no real medicine involved. In some cases, patients who were given sham surgeries, where doctors made an incision but performed no real operation, reported just as much improvement as those who had the real procedure. Their belief in the surgery alone was enough to trigger healing. But if belief can create real physical change, then how much of what we consider illness is actually controlled by the mind? If your brain can suppress pain, lower stress, and speed up recovery just by expecting to heal, then how many of your symptoms are influenced, not just by biology, but by what you believe? And here's where the paradox deepens. If a placebo can heal, then what happens when you believe the opposite? This is the nocebo effect, where negative expectations cause real harm. If a doctor tells you a side effect is common, you are more likely to experience it, even if the drug itself doesn't cause it. If you believe you're getting sick, your body may actually manifest symptoms. The brain isn't just capable of healing itself, it's capable of making itself sick too. So now, the unsettling question: if the brain can heal or harm itself based on belief, then how much control do you actually have over your own health? If you think you're powerless against illness, do you actually become weaker? If you believe in a treatment, does it actually make you stronger? If the mind is this powerful, then where is the true boundary between sickness and health? The placebo effect paradox forces us to question the very nature of medicine, pain, and reality itself. If a fake pill can trigger real healing, then what else is your brain capable of? So the next time you take medicine, ask yourself, is this pill helping me, or is my mind the real cure? The nocebo effect paradox. How can believing in harm actually make you sick? You feel fine, no pain, no discomfort, no sickness. Then someone tells you that a new medication you took has a nasty side effect: headaches, nausea, fatigue. Suddenly, you don't feel so well. Your head starts to ache. You feel lightheaded. Maybe your stomach churns. It's exactly what they warned you about. But here's the problem. The medication you took was just a sugar pill. There were no active ingredients, no real side effects. Your body wasn't reacting to the drug. It was reacting to the expectation of harm. This is the nocebo effect paradox, the unsettling reality that just believing something will hurt you can actually make you sick. Your mind isn't just a passive observer of your body, it's an active creator of your symptoms. But here's the paradox. If your body can manifest real suffering based purely on belief, then how do you know which of your symptoms are real and which are just self-inflicted illusions? Science proves this phenomenon is not just in your head, it's in your biology. When people believe they've been exposed to something harmful, their bodies react as if they actually have been. Studies show that patients who believe they are allergic to a harmless substance develop real allergic symptoms: hives, swelling, difficulty breathing. Those warned about possible side effects from medication experience those effects, even when they took a placebo. People exposed to fake toxins, like saline labeled as a harmful chemical, show real signs of poisoning. In extreme cases, people have even died from nocebo effects. Some were misdiagnosed with terminal illnesses and died, only for autopsies to reveal they had nothing fatal. Their belief in their own death was enough to shut their bodies down. But here's where the paradox deepens. If the belief in harm can create real illness, then how many of our daily aches, pains, and conditions are actually fueled by our expectations? If you constantly believe stress is killing you, is it actually making you sicker? If you assume every minor pain is a serious disease, does that fear invite more suffering? If doctors, media, or even well-meaning friends warn you about the dangers of something, how much of your reaction is your body obeying that belief rather than reality? And now, the most unsettling question. If the mind is powerful enough to make you sick, is it also powerful enough to heal you? If fear and negative expectation can harm, can hope and positive expectation undo that damage? The nocebo effect. Paradox forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Your thoughts don't just influence your health. They might be shaping it more than you realize. So the next time you feel unwell, ask yourself, am I sick because of something real, or because my mind decided I should be? The Tetris Effect Paradox. Why do repeated activities appear in dreams and automatic thoughts? You spend the day playing Tetris, slotting pieces together, watching them disappear. Later that night, you close your eyes, and there they are, falling blocks in your dreams, flashing behind your eyelids. Or maybe you've been driving for hours, staring at the road. When you finally stop, you still feel the motion, as if the world is moving without you. Perhaps you binge a video game, and afterward, you start seeing its patterns in the real world, mentally arranging objects like game elements, as if your brain has been permanently rewired. This is the Tetris Effect Paradox, the strange phenomenon where a repeated activity intrudes into your subconscious, showing up in your dreams, thoughts, and even how you perceive reality. It's as if your brain, unable to shut off the pattern, keeps running the program long after you've stopped. But here's the paradox. If your brain can imprint repetitive experiences so deeply that they override your thoughts, then how much of what you think about is actually your choice? Your brain is designed to adapt to patterns. When you do something over and over, your mind keeps processing it even after you stop. It's a form of neuroplasticity, where repeated exposure rewires your thought patterns, sometimes to the point where you can't turn it off. Chess players visualize chessboards even when they're not playing. Factory workers see conveyor belts and moving parts long after they leave work. People who binge-watch a TV series start narrating their own lives in the show's style. After scrolling endlessly through social media, your brain starts auto-completing real-life situations as if they were posts waiting to be shared. Your brain doesn't know when to stop. It takes what you repeat and pushes it into the default mode of your thinking, slipping it into your unconscious as if it were essential information. But here's where the paradox deepens. If repetition can hijack your subconscious, then how much of your daily thinking is actually yours? Right now, your automatic thoughts, your worries, habits, even the way you interpret the world, might just be mental residue from repeated experiences. If your brain is shaped by what you expose it to most, then how many of your thoughts are just echoes of the things you repeatedly consume? And here's the unsettling question. If you can't control what imprints on your mind, then are you truly in control of your thoughts at all? The Tetris Effect Paradox forces us to consider how much of our mental world is deliberate versus automatic. If your brain absorbs what you repeat, then maybe your reality, your habits, your dreams, your perspective is being shaped without your permission. So the next time you catch yourself thinking in loops, ask yourself, is this thought mine, or was it just repeated so often that my brain decided to keep playing it? The Pareidolia Paradox. If you see patterns where none exist, is your brain tricking you or revealing hidden truths? You glance at the moon and see a face staring back. You look at a tree's bark and there's an old man's profile. A shadow on the wall looks eerily like a lurking figure. The moment you recognize it, the illusion feels undeniable. Your brain has found a pattern where there was none, turning randomness into something familiar, something meaningful. This is the Pareidolia Paradox, the strange and universal phenomenon where your brain insists on seeing patterns, shapes, and even personalities in meaningless stimuli. A cloud becomes a galloping horse. A car's headlights and grille look like an expressionless face. A random stain on the floor resembles an animal. These illusions happen instantly, involuntarily. You don't choose to see them. Your brain does it for you. But here's the paradox. If you see something that isn't really there, is your brain deceiving you, or is it revealing a hidden truth? Your mind is a pattern detection machine, wired to make sense of chaos. From an evolutionary perspective, this ability kept early humans alive. Seeing a tiger's outline in the bushes, even if it was just an illusion, was far safer than missing a real predator. Recognizing faces instantly helped us navigate social groups and detect danger. But this system is so hypersensitive that it finds patterns everywhere, even where none exist. Your brain doesn't like randomness. It demands order, and when reality won't provide it, your mind invents it. And yet, if pareidolia is simply an illusion, why does it feel so convincing? If a pattern seems undeniably real, even if logic says otherwise, then is it truly fake? What if your brain isn't making mistakes, but rather revealing something deeper about perception itself? This paradox forces us to confront an unsettling question. How much of what you see is actually there, and how much is just a projection of your mind? If your brain creates images and meanings from nothing, then how much of your daily perception is just your mind filling in gaps, shaping the world into something that makes sense? And here's where the paradox deepens. If pareidolia is just a trick of the mind, why do so many of history's greatest insights begin with pattern recognition? Scientists, artists, and visionaries throughout history have seen connections others couldn't, in numbers, in nature, in the randomness of life itself. What if the same pattern-seeking ability that makes you see faces in clouds also helps you detect real truths that others overlook? The Pareidolia Paradox forces us to ask, is your brain simply misfiring, or is it giving you a glimpse of something beyond the surface of reality? So the next time you see a face in the shadows or an image in the stars, ask yourself, is my mind playing tricks on me, or am I just seeing something that no one else has noticed yet? The Thought Suppression Paradox. Why does trying not to think about something make you think about it more? Don't think about a white bear. Too late. It's already in your mind, standing there, unavoidable. You weren't thinking about it a second ago, but the moment you tried to suppress the thought, it became louder, clearer, inescapable. The more you push it away, the more it lingers, refusing to leave. This is the thought suppression paradox, the strange reality that the harder you try not to think about something, the more your mind fixates on it. Instead of making the unwanted thought disappear, suppression only amplifies it, trapping you in a mental loop where the very act of resistance keeps the thought alive. But here's the paradox. If your mind is under your control, then why does fighting a thought make it stronger instead of weaker? This effect, known as the ironic process theory, reveals a disturbing truth about how your brain works. When you tell yourself not to think about something, your mind sets up two conflicting systems. The first tries to push the thought away, but the second, designed to monitor whether you're succeeding, keeps scanning for the very thought you're trying to erase. In other words, your brain is constantly checking, am I thinking about it yet? Which, ironically, forces you to think about it. This is why trying to forget an embarrassing moment makes it replay in your head. It's why trying to stay calm only makes anxiety worse. It's why ignoring pain makes it feel sharper. Why forcing yourself to fall asleep makes you more awake. Why suppressing emotions makes them bubble up uncontrollably later. Your brain doesn't just fail at suppression, it rebels against it. And here's where the paradox deepens. If trying to not think about something makes it more persistent, then how much control do you actually have over your own mind? What if the very act of resisting a thought enslaves you to it? If you obsess over eliminating an idea, then are you choosing to focus on it, or is it choosing you? And if suppression backfires, then what's the solution? Research shows that accepting thoughts rather than fighting them weakens their grip. Instead of pushing away the white bear, you acknowledge it, let it exist, and in doing so, you rob it of its power. The paradox is that true control over your thoughts comes not from resisting them, but from allowing them to pass through without a fight. The thought suppression paradox forces us to confront a haunting truth. The harder you fight your thoughts, the more power they have over you. So the next time your mind fixates on something you desperately want to forget, ask yourself, am I thinking about this because I want to, or because I told myself I shouldn't? The free will paradox. If your brain makes decisions before you're aware of them, do you have free will? You reach for a glass of water. It feels like a conscious choice. You decided to move your hand, and so you did. But what if that decision was made before you even knew you made it? Neuroscientists have conducted experiments showing that your brain registers a decision before you become consciously aware of it. In one famous study, brain scans revealed that activity in the motor cortex spiked several hundred milliseconds before participants reported making a choice. In other words, their brains had already decided, and only afterward did they feel like they had made the choice. This is the free will paradox, the unsettling realization that your conscious decisions may not be as free as you think. If your brain is making choices before you experience them as conscious thoughts, then who or what is actually in control? But here's the paradox. If free will is the ability to consciously choose and your brain acts before you are aware of choosing, then how can free will exist? Most people assume they are in control of their actions. You feel like you decide when to move, what to say, what to think. But neuroscience suggests that your brain acts first, and your conscious awareness catches up later. Your sense of agency, your belief that you are actively choosing, is possibly just an illusion, a story your mind tells itself to make sense of decisions that were already set in motion. And here's where the paradox deepens. If your brain is deciding before you are aware of it, then where do you fit into the equation? Are you merely a passenger, watching your thoughts and actions unfold as if they were predetermined? Or do you somehow shape these unconscious choices, even if you aren't aware of doing so? Some philosophers argue that free will still exists. It's just operating at a deeper, unconscious level. Maybe you aren't the small, thinking voice in your head, but the larger system of the brain itself, making choices long before your awareness catches up. Others argue that free will is an illusion, that we are simply biological machines following a complex web of neural processes with no real agency at all. And now the question becomes even more unsettling. If your thoughts and actions are pre-programmed before you experience them as decisions, then how much of your life is truly your own? How many of your choices were actually determined before you even knew you had them? The free will paradox forces us to ask, are we the authors of our decisions, or are we just rationalizing choices that were never really ours to begin with? So the next time you make a decision, ask yourself, did I choose this? Or was the choice already made, and I'm just catching up? The self-perception paradox. If you act confident, your brain rewires itself to believe you are. You don't feel confident, but you fake it. You stand tall, speak with certainty, and force yourself to smile. At first, it feels unnatural, like you're pretending to be someone you're not. But then, something strange happens. The more you act confident, the more you start to feel confident. The nervousness fades, the hesitation weakens. And then it clicks. You're not pretending anymore. This is the self-perception paradox, the bizarre reality that your brain takes cues from your actions and rewires itself accordingly. Instead of confidence coming first, it's the behavior that shapes the belief. You aren't acting confident because you feel confident. You start feeling confident because you acted that way first. But here's the paradox. If confidence can be created simply by acting as if you have it, then was the original insecurity ever real? This phenomenon is backed by psychology. Studies show that people who adopt powerful body language, even if they don't feel powerful, begin to experience real physiological changes, lower stress hormones, higher testosterone, increased risk-taking. Simply standing in an expansive posture for 2 minutes can make you feel more in control. Similarly, smiling, even when you don't feel happy, triggers the brain to release dopamine and serotonin, the very chemicals that make you feel happy in the first place. Your brain is always looking for evidence about who you are. When it sees you acting a certain way, whether it's confident, outgoing, or even happy, it assumes that must be the truth. It rewires itself to match your actions. You don't think yourself into a new way of being. You behave yourself into it. But here's where the paradox deepens. If confidence, happiness, or even self-worth can be programmed simply by behaving differently, then how many of your so-called natural traits are just self-reinforcing loops? If you always act shy, does your brain lock in that identity, reinforcing it every day? If you always avoid risk, does your mind accept fear as your default state? And now comes the most unsettling question. If who you are is shaped by your actions, then how much of your personality is actually a choice? If you can construct confidence, then maybe insecurity was never something you had, just something you unknowingly practiced. The self-perception paradox forces us to ask, are you truly the person you think you are, or have you just been acting that way for so long that your brain assumed it was true? So the next time you feel like you aren't confident enough, stop and ask yourself, do I lack confidence, or have I just never acted like I have it? The time perception paradox. Why does time slow down in danger and speed up with age? You're falling, maybe from a bike, maybe from a great height. In that split second, time stretches. Every detail sharpens, the air rushing past your skin, the ground rushing up to meet you, the way your body twists midair. Everything feels like it's moving in slow motion. But then, when it's over, you look at the clock and realize it all happened in an instant. Yet, as you grow older, the opposite happens. A whole year passes, and you barely feel it. You blink, and a decade has gone by. Time, once vast and endless, now slips away faster and faster until you start wondering, where did it all go? This is the time perception paradox, the strange reality that time is not absolute in your mind. It bends, stretches, and shrinks depending on your experience. Moments of danger last forever. Years of routine vanish in an instant. But here's the paradox. If time is supposed to be fixed, then why does your brain experience it so differently? Scientists have found that your perception of time is deeply tied to attention and memory. When you are in extreme danger, your brain absorbs far more details than usual. It switches into survival mode, processing everything with greater intensity. The result? The moment feels longer, because your mind has packed it with more information. But as you age, the opposite happens. When you were a child, every experience was new, filling your brain with fresh memories. The world was unpredictable. New faces, new places, new emotions. But as you grow older, routine sets in. Your days become repetitive, your experiences blur together, and your brain stops recording as much detail. Time speeds up because your mind stops noticing the passing of time. And here's where the paradox deepens. If your experience of time is based on how much newness you encounter, then that means time is subjective. It isn't measured by clocks, it's measured by your perception. If your life is filled with novelty, time slows down. If you fall into routine, time accelerates. So now the question becomes disturbing. If time is controlled by perception, then how much control do you have over time itself? If adding new experiences slows time down, then is the feeling of time slipping away just a side effect of living the same day over and over? The time perception paradox forces us to ask, is time truly passing faster, or have we just stopped paying attention to it? So the next time you feel like time is slipping through your fingers, stop and ask yourself, is time moving faster, or have I just stopped filling it with enough life to notice? The reality filtering paradox. Your brain filters out most of reality, so how much are you actually experiencing? Right now, as you read this, there are countless things happening around you that you aren't aware of. The feeling of your clothes on your skin, the sound of the air conditioning humming in the background, the way your tongue rests in your mouth, the flickering of tiny shadows as light shifts. But none of this exists for you until you think about it. This is the reality filtering paradox, the unsettling truth that your brain is constantly filtering out the vast majority of reality, showing you only a tiny fraction of what's actually there. You believe you're experiencing the world as it is, but in reality, you are experiencing only what your brain allows you to notice. And here's the paradox. If your mind is choosing what to show you and what to ignore, then how much of reality are you missing? Your brain is not a passive observer, it's a gatekeeper. At any given moment, your senses are bombarded with millions of pieces of information, but you can only process a tiny fraction of them. To avoid complete sensory overload, your mind filters out what it considers irrelevant. Most of what you see, hear, feel, and think about isn't the full picture. It's just the edited version your brain has constructed for you. Right now, in your peripheral vision, there are things you aren't consciously seeing. The sounds around you exist, but if your brain decides they aren't important, they fade into the background. Even your thoughts are filtered. Some ideas never even reach your awareness. But here's where the paradox deepens. If your brain is selecting what you perceive, then how do you know you are experiencing reality accurately? If your mind decides what's real and what isn't, then what is reality, really? This explains why you can miss something that is right in front of you. It's why people fail to notice obvious changes in their surroundings, why eyewitness testimony is often unreliable, and why someone can be speaking directly to you, but if your attention is elsewhere, it's as if their words never existed. And now comes the most unsettling question. If your brain is filtering reality, then how much of the world has been hidden from you? If you could somehow remove these mental filters, would you see a richer, more complex reality, one that was always there, just beyond your perception? The reality filtering paradox forces us to ask, how much of life is passing by unnoticed, not because it isn't there, but because your mind decided it wasn't important? So the next time you think you are experiencing the world as it is, stop and ask yourself, is this reality, or just the tiny sliver of it my brain decided to let me see? The memory illusion paradox. If your memories can be altered, how do you know they're real? You remember it clearly. A childhood trip to the beach, the smell of salt in the air, the way the waves crashed against the shore, the laughter of your family echoing in the distance. It's a vivid, irrefutable memory, a piece of your past, something that happened exactly as you recall. Except, what if it didn't? This is the memory illusion paradox, the unsettling reality that your memories, the very foundation of your identity, are not as reliable as you think. Scientific research has shown that memories are not fixed recordings, but fluid reconstructions, prone to distortion, omission, and even complete fabrication. The very act of remembering something changes it, altering the details each time it resurfaces in your mind. And here's the paradox. If your past shapes who you are, but your memories of the past are unreliable, then how much of you is based on fiction? Studies show that people can be tricked into remembering events that never happened. Researchers have implanted completely false memories in participants, Memories of childhood experiences that never occurred, crimes they never committed, conversations they never had. All it takes is suggestion, repetition, or an authority figure reinforcing the illusion, and suddenly the brain constructs a story so convincing that the person believes it completely. But here's where the paradox deepens. If memories can be altered, influenced, or even manufactured out of thin air, then how much of what you remember is actually real? How many of your cherished moments, regrets, and deeply held beliefs are based on memories that have warped over time? If every time you recall a memory, it subtly changes, then is there ever such a thing as a true memory at all? And now, the most unsettling question. If your memories define your sense of self, but those memories are unreliable, then who are you really? The memory illusion. Paradox forces us to confront a disturbing possibility. What if the past you remember is not the past that actually happened? So the next time you recall a moment from your life with absolute certainty, stop and ask yourself, do I remember this because it happened, or just because my mind insists that it did? The observer effect paradox. If observing something changes it, can you ever see reality as it truly is? You walk into a quiet room. The moment you arrive, the atmosphere shifts. Conversations pause for a fraction of a second. People glance your way. You were simply observing, not interacting, yet your presence changed something. Now take this concept further. Scientists studying subatomic particles have found that the mere act of observing them alters their behavior. Light can behave as both a wave and a particle, but which one it chooses depends entirely on whether or not it is being measured. The second we try to watch reality unfold, reality changes. This is the observer effect paradox, the mind-bending idea that you can never truly see the world as it is, because the moment you observe it, you are already influencing it. But here's the paradox. If reality shifts the moment it is observed, then how can you ever know what reality actually is? Physics shows us that particles behave differently when unobserved, meaning that the act of looking at something forces it to take on a fixed state. This raises unsettling questions about the nature of existence itself. Is the world as we see it only one possible version of reality, forced into existence the moment we look at it? If so, then what does reality look like when no one is watching? And this isn't just a problem in physics, it's a human paradox too. The moment you watch someone, they change. People act differently when they know they are being observed. Even your own thoughts and actions shift when you become self-conscious. You act one way when alone, another way in a crowd. Your mind becomes both the observer and the observed, creating a loop where the act of witnessing reality is shaping the very thing you are trying to understand. But here's where the paradox deepens. If observation alters reality, then is anything you experience truly objective? Every time you try to measure, analyze, or understand the world, you are influencing it. Every piece of data you collect, every conclusion you draw, is already tainted by the fact that you were there to observe it. And now the most unsettling question. If reality exists differently when you're not looking, then what does the world look like when you turn away? The observer effect paradox forces us to ask, are we seeing reality, or are we simply seeing the version of it that our observation created? So the next time you try to understand the world around you, stop and ask yourself, am I seeing what's really there, or is my presence changing it into something else? The ship of Theseus Paradox. If every part of you is replaced over time, are you still the same person? You own a ship. Over the years, the wood begins to rot, so you replace one plank at a time, Decades pass, and eventually, every single piece of wood has been replaced. Not a single original plank remains. Is it still the same ship? Now, take it a step further. Imagine collecting all the old discarded planks and rebuilding them into another ship. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? The one that slowly changed over time, or the one made from the original pieces? This is the ship of Theseus paradox, the unsettling question of whether identity can survive change. But here's the paradox. If something can be completely rebuilt, one piece at a time, yet still be considered the same, then what does it actually mean to be the same? Now apply this to yourself. Every 7 to 10 years, every single cell in your body is replaced. The skin you have now isn't the same skin you had a decade ago. Your bones, your muscles, even the neurons in your brain, all of them have changed. There is not a single atom in your body that was part of you when you were a child. So, are you still the same person? If you are completely different on a physical level, what makes you you? Is it your memories, your personality? But memories change. You forget things, reinterpret events, rewrite your own past. Your personality isn't fixed either. You have different beliefs, preferences, and behaviors than you did 10 years ago. And here's where the paradox deepens. If identity isn't tied to physical matter, and it isn't tied to memory or personality, then where does it exist? If every part of you can change and you are still you, then what exactly is the core that remains? And now the most unsettling question. If you are not the same person you were 10 years ago, then are you still responsible for the actions of your past self? If someone changes so much over time that they are fundamentally different, at what point do they stop being the same person who made past mistakes or past achievements? The ship of Theseus paradox forces us to ask, if we are constantly changing, then what part of us is truly permanent? So the next time you look in the mirror, stop and ask yourself, am I the same person I've always been, or just a new version of myself pretending that I am? The Grandfather Paradox. If you could change the past, would you erase yourself from existence? You step into a time machine, set the dial, and travel back decades before you were born. You find your grandfather as a young man and, for reasons beyond logic, you prevent him from meeting your grandmother. Now the unthinkable happens. Your grandfather never has children. Your parents are never born, and neither are you. But here's the paradox. If you were never born, then who went back in time to stop it from happening? This is the Grandfather Paradox, the mind-bending contradiction that emerges when you alter the past in a way that erases the very conditions that allowed you to alter it in the first place. If changing the past prevents you from ever existing, then how could you have been there to change it at all? But here's the deeper paradox. If time travel to the past is possible, then how can free will exist? If you can change history, but changing history erases the version of you that made the change, then does time simply prevent contradictions? Is history locked in place, unchangeable, no matter what you do? Some theories suggest that the universe prevents paradoxes by self-correcting. If you try to kill your grandfather, something will always stop you. A last-minute hesitation, a broken weapon, a sudden accident. No matter what you do, history protects itself. Others propose that changing the past creates a branching timeline, a parallel universe where your actions reshape history, but the original timeline still exists. You never erase yourself. You simply create a new reality where you were never born, while your original self remains in the universe it came from. But then, the paradox deepens. If time splits into infinite possibilities, then how many versions of you exist? If every possible outcome branches into a new reality, then in some universe, you failed. In another, you succeeded. And in yet another, you never traveled back in time at all. And now, the most unsettling question: if every choice creates a new timeline, then which version of you is the real one? If there are infinite versions of you, living out infinite possibilities, then are you truly in control of your fate? Or are you just one of many possible versions, each believing itself to be unique? The Grandfather Paradox forces us to confront the unsettling nature of time, identity, and free will. If the past can be rewritten, then so can you. If time is fixed, then maybe your choices are an illusion. So the next time you wonder about time travel, stop and ask yourself, if I could change the past, would I still be here to remember doing it? The Bootstrap Paradox. If an idea has no origin, where did it come from? You find an old book filled with groundbreaking scientific theories. The knowledge inside is decades ahead of its time. Inspired, you copy its contents, study them, and eventually publish them as your own. The world hails you as a genius. But then, something strange happens. Years later, a young scientist finds your book, copies it, and publishes the same discoveries again. That book is passed down through history, eventually becoming the very same book you originally found. And here's the paradox. If the knowledge in the book has no original author, where did it come from? This is the Bootstrap Paradox, a mind-bending situation where an object, idea, or piece of information creates itself by looping through time with no clear origin. It exists simply because it exists. But here's the paradox. If something can exist without ever being created, then does time even need a beginning? Science fiction loves this paradox. A time traveler goes back in time and teaches Shakespeare how to write plays, only to realize later that he learned Shakespeare's works from the very plays he inspired Shakespeare to write. A musician is given a song from the future, records it, and then, years later, someone time travels and gives them their own song back, with no point of creation. The paradox suggests something disturbing. Not everything needs an origin. But if something can exist without being created, then what does that mean for everything else? If a book can appear in history without ever being written, then could an invention, a philosophy, or even an entire civilization exist simply because it looped through time with no clear moment of creation? Could reality itself be caught in a causal loop, repeating endlessly without ever having a first cause? And here's where the paradox deepens. If the Bootstrap Paradox is possible, then where does knowledge come from? If information can exist without an origin, then how much of what we discover is truly new, and how much has always been there, waiting to be looped back into history? And now, the most unsettling question. If you received knowledge from an unknown source, how would you ever know if you were the first to have it? If an idea appears in your mind, can you ever be sure it was truly yours? Or are you simply passing it forward in a loop that has no beginning? The Bootstrap Paradox forces us to confront the nature of time, causality, and originality itself. If things can exist without an origin, then reality may not be as linear as we believe. So the next time you have a brilliant idea, stop and ask yourself, did I create this, or did I just receive it from the future without realizing? The Fermi Paradox. If the universe is so vast, where is everybody? You look up at the night sky. Thousands of stars dot the darkness, each one a sun like ours. Beyond them, billions of galaxies stretch endlessly across the cosmos. Trillions of planets orbit these stars. Some of them must be Earth-like. Some must have existed billions of years before us. Some should have evolved life, intelligent life. And yet, we hear nothing. No signals, no visitors, no undeniable proof that anyone else is out there. This is the Fermi Paradox, the haunting contradiction between the high probability that extraterrestrial civilizations should exist and the absolute silence we receive from the universe. But here's the paradox. If intelligent life should be common, then why do we see no evidence of it? Mathematically, the numbers are staggering. With hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy alone, and an estimated 6 billion Earth-like planets, it seems almost certain that at least some of them should have developed intelligent civilizations. And if some of those civilizations had even a small technological head start, say, 1,000,000 years, they would have had plenty of time to colonize the galaxy, send signals, or leave undeniable proof of their existence. Yet, as far as we can tell, we are alone. And this is where the paradox deepens. There are only two possible answers. Either they are out there, or they are not. If they are not, then we must accept that we are either uniquely special, or terrifyingly alone. It means that despite all the conditions being right, life almost never emerges. That something, perhaps a great cosmic filter, prevents intelligence from lasting long enough to spread. Maybe civilizations destroy themselves before they can reach the stars. Maybe life itself is extraordinarily rare. Maybe we are the first or the last. But if they are out there, then why haven't we found them? Maybe they are avoiding us. Maybe they are watching us without revealing themselves. Maybe the signals are there, but we don't recognize them. Maybe they exist on timescales beyond human comprehension, their civilizations rising and falling in cycles far older than our entire species. And now, the most unsettling question: if they are out there, do they know about us? And if they do, why are they staying silent? The Fermi Paradox forces us to confront one of the biggest mysteries in existence. Are we truly alone in the universe, or is the silence hiding something far stranger? So, the next time you look up at the stars, ask yourself, is the universe empty, or are we just not ready to hear the answer?